Is the four-day work week the answer to America's burnout? Can less actually be more when it comes to time spent at the office? The world's biggest study of the four-day work week suggests the answer to both those questions is yes. Employers saw productivity, for the most part, increase, as did employees' mental health. Joining us now is Juliet Schor, a Boston College economist, and sociologist. Her team led this study of 61 British businesses and 2,900 employees. So Juliet, great to have you. 90% will continue studying it, 30% making it permanent. Why?
Well, they've had really great results for both the workers and the companies themselves. On the employee side, pretty much all the metrics that we looked at, stress, burnout, physical health, mental health, fatigue, exercise, sleep problems, satisfaction, all went up significantly. And at the same time, the companies experienced good revenue performance, reductions in absenteeism, better retention of employees, and they rated the trial an 8.5 on a scale of 0 to 0. So win-win for both sides.
You mentioned that retention. How much better did those companies perform? Because we know the labor shortage, at least here in the U.S., obviously a massive issue and something that many executives are pretty worried about.
Well, I see you have it up on the graphic, but the turnover fell by 57%. And in the UK, they're facing something similar, people leaving and a lot of open positions. One of the things we're seeing with this research is that more companies are coming to us because of those open positions, inability to keep people. And this is a real competitive advantage in the labor market.
Now, did the employees still work a 40-hour week? Did they go 4 10-hour days, or were they actually working fewer hours? And perhaps the question is, why not do this in terms of the employer side of it?
So it's not a 40-hour week. It's for most of the companies, they went to a 32-hour week, 4 days. On average, not everybody got down there because occasionally people would have to do a little bit of extra work or maybe an hour of work on their off day. But the new schedule was for almost all of them was for that 4 days, 32 hours. You said, why not? Well, we think that the results from this trial, the 2 previous trials we did, the trials that we are just finishing now, show that for many companies, this really is a viable option, that employees are much better off, they value their jobs more, and they're able to maintain productivity through a kind of work reorganization process that they go through for 2 months before the trial starts, getting rid of a lot of dysfunctional cultures around meetings, distractions, and so forth. So I think partly we just need to spread the word that this is a viable way to work.
There must, though, be a downside, right? Not everyone is continuing. I know I'm skeptical, but there has to be some downside to shifting.
Well, partly, almost nobody is not continuing. Let me just say that. Yeah. In our first 2 trials, nobody told us they weren't continuing. I think maybe 1 or 2 out of the 61. Partly it's a self-selection bias, right? These are companies who opted to do this, presumably because they thought they could make it work, and almost all of them did make it work. This doesn't mean that any random company could suddenly succeed with this. There are some companies that are burning their workers out. They can't ask them to do 5 days work in 4 days. Healthcare comes to mind there. For those, you're going to have to hire new people on that 5th day. But if they don't do something about the way they're overworking and burning out their workers, there are big costs to that too. So I think ultimately this can be viable for all companies. It may just take us a while to get there.
Yeah, and this study, of course, took place in the UK. When you talk about it potentially happening over here in the US, do you see it working here? And why do you think maybe we have seen a resistance here in the US when it comes to a 4-day work week?
Well, we've already done and finished 1 trial in the US, which was a huge success, with very similar findings. We released those reports in December. It was about half the size of the UK. We started another one in October of 2022, and we're finishing that next month, and then we'll be starting another. So there are plenty of companies in the US that are beginning to do this and doing so successfully. And one interesting thing is, although most of these companies are white-collar companies, professionals and tech and so forth, we have restaurants, healthcare, we have manufacturing, construction. So you are seeing companies across the board that are actually implementing this successfully.
Wanted to get your thoughts before we go on Amazon employees outright rejecting what Andy Jassy, their CEO, has said, come back to the office 3 days a week. There are 15,000 on a Slack channel complaining about this, an internal petition. What do you make of that rejection of 3 days a week, given that they already laid off 18,000 workers? And where are we headed in terms of return to office? Are we going to plateau about that 50% mark?
I can't predict that, but I do know that the resistance that many workers have to going back into the office is also part of what is creating more pressure for a 4-day week, because people are burned out. They're stressed out. A 2-day weekend is not enough. And companies need to recognize that. People worked really hard through the pandemic, but it was extremely stressful. And it's not clear to me why some of these companies are taking such a hard line on getting people back into the office, when it's pretty clear a lot of people prefer at least a hybrid with only a couple of days on-prem, as they say.
Should be interesting to see how that wraps up and how your test goes here in the United States. So please come back once you've fully conducted that. Juliet Schor from Boston College, great to have you. Appreciate that.